We've all encountered them people who are absolutely convinced of their own expertise despite clear evidence to the contrary. They derail meetings with misplaced confidence. They become instant authorities after a single documentary. They spar online with seasoned professionals and never budge an inch. What fuels this mismatch between confidence and competence? A fascinating psychological bias uncovered in 1999, the Dunning-Kruger Effect. Back then, social psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger asked a simple question. Why do the least skilled people so often believe they're the best? Their curiosity was sparked by a spectacularly misguided bank robber. In 1995, MacArthur Wheeler strolled into two Pittsburgh banks, face slicked with lemon juice. He'd read that lemon juice works as invisible ink and figured it would hide him from security cameras. Spoiler, it didn't. When police showed him the footage, he was stunned. But I wore the juice. Dunning saw a deeper lesson. If you're truly incompetent, you lack the very insight required to notice your incompetence. He teamed up with Kruger, tested volunteers on humor, grammar, and logic, then asked them to guess how they'd scored. The results were startling and repeatable. Bottom quartile performers thought they'd beaten most of their peers. Top performers, meanwhile, tended to underestimate themselves. In short, lack of skill breeds overconfidence, while expertise often breeds doubt. Why does this happen? 1. Unknown unknowns. When we're new to a field, we don't yet grasp what we don't know. The very skills needed to spot errors are the skills we lack. 2. Confirmation bias. Once we decide we're competent, we cherry-pick evidence that says so. Successes feel like proof. Failures get blamed on bad luck. 3. Faulty self-calibration. Without clear feedback, humans default to thinking they're above average, an illusion called illusory superiority. As Bertrand Russell quipped, the whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, and wiser people so full of doubts. Recognizing the Dunning-Kruger effect in others is easy. Spotting it in ourselves? Much harder. So how can we guard against it? Seek honest feedback from mentors, peers, data. Compare your process to established best practices, not just your own past work. Embrace lifelong learning. Competence is a moving target. Remember, confidence should follow evidence, not precede it. The paradox is simple. The moment you're sure you can't possibly be wrong is the moment you most need to double-check your assumptions. Stay curious, stay humble, and let knowledge, not ego, be your guide. The journey from novice to expert is rarely a straight line. It begins, ironically, at a place known as Mount Stupid. This is the peak of confidence that many beginners reach after gaining just a little knowledge. They've learned enough to feel informed, but not enough to realize how much they still don't know. As Mark Twain once said, it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. From that peak, reality eventually sets in. New information starts to reveal the true complexity of the field, and confidence takes a dive. This is known as the Valley of Despair. It's the point where learning feels overwhelming, where your self-image starts to crack. Many people quit here, convinced they're not cut out for it. But for those who persist, something powerful happens. They begin the long, slow climb up the slope of enlightenment. Their knowledge deepens. Their confidence grows, but this time, in proportion to their actual ability. Eventually, they reach the plateau of sustainability, a steady place where high competence meets appropriately measured confidence. Interestingly, even here, true experts often show a kind of quiet doubt. They've seen how vast the field really is. They understand its complexity, its nuance, and all the things they still don't know. As Nobel-winning physicist Richard Feynman put it, I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers that might be wrong. That kind of intellectual humility is the hallmark of real expertise, a stark contrast to the loud certainty of those just starting out. Although the Dunning-Kruger effect is most famously studied in labs and classrooms, its reach extends far beyond that. In the workplace, it shows up as the employee who consistently overestimates their own contribution, but resists feedback and stalls in growth. In fact, one study found that 95% of managers rated themselves in the top 50% of performers, a statistical impossibility. In medicine, the consequences can be serious, even fatal. Research shows that medical students with the lowest skills often overrate their abilities the most, and doctors most confident in their diagnoses, they weren't more accurate than others, but they were less likely to double-check or ask for a second opinion. And in politics, the loudest voices on complex topics like economics, climate change, or international relations often come from those with the least nuanced understanding. Meanwhile, real experts tend to speak cautiously, acknowledging what we don't yet know. In today's world, the Dunning-Kruger effect has found fertile ground. Social media. Anyone, regardless of expertise, can now broadcast their opinions to millions, and do so with the same apparent authority as seasoned professionals. This has led to what researchers are calling an expertise crisis, a blurring of the line between knowledge and opinion, between credentialed insight and confident ignorance. As Neil deGrasse Tyson puts it, one of the great challenges in this world is knowing enough about a subject to think you're right, but not enough about the subject to know you're wrong. But the way the Dunning-Kruger effect shows up isn't the same everywhere. Culture plays a big role. In the West, especially in the US, confidence and self-promotion are highly valued. From an early age, children are taught to believe in themselves. This cultural norm, while empowering, can also foster overestimation. In contrast, many East Asian cultures place a high value on humility, reflection, and awareness of limitations. Japanese students, for instance, often rate themselves below average, the exact opposite of what's seen in American samples. This self-critical approach may act as a protective buffer against the Dunning-Kruger effect. In collectivist societies where group harmony matters more than individual pride, people may be more receptive to feedback and less likely to inflate their self-assessments. As Confucius wisely said, real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. And perhaps that's the lesson we all need to remember. The true path to mastery starts not with confidence, but with humility. However, no culture is truly immune to the cognitive blind spots that fuel the Dunning-Kruger effect. The core challenge, not knowing what you don't know, is universal. It crosses borders, languages, and belief systems. How this overconfidence shows up might vary from one culture to another, but the fundamental human limitation, that stays the same. While the Dunning-Kruger effect warns us about the dangers of misplaced confidence, it's important to remember confidence itself isn't the enemy. In fact, a healthy amount of self-belief is essential. It fuels motivation, drives perseverance, and helps us rise after failure. The issue only arises when confidence becomes misaligned with actual ability. That's when we see poor decisions, resistance to feedback, and unnecessary conflict with others. But when confidence is calibrated, when it reflects reality, it becomes a powerful tool. Research in performance psychology supports this. Top performers often share a common trait. They have moderate, grounded confidence, enough to act, to push through discomfort, to keep going, but not so much that they ignore their blind spots. This is the sweet spot, the place where self-belief and self-awareness live side by side. And interestingly, studies suggest that slight overconfidence, just a small nudge above reality, can actually be helpful. This positive illusion gives us the momentum to start, to take risks, to bounce back when things get hard. The key is the degree. There's a big difference between a gentle overestimation that fuels progress and the kind of wild overconfidence that defines the Dunning-Kruger effect. As psychologist Albert Bandura put it, people who have a sense of self-efficacy bounce back from failures. They approach things in terms of how to handle them, rather than worrying about what can go wrong. That's not delusion. That's resilient self-belief. And it's rooted in a mindset that says, I believe in my ability to improve, not just in what I already know. So the real goal isn't to eliminate confidence, it's to align it, to build what psychologists call epistemic humility alongside self-efficacy. In other words, know what you're capable of, but also know what you're not. But here's the catch. The Dunning-Kruger effect is hardest to see in ourselves. By definition, it clouds self-awareness. It creates a blind spot so strong we don't even realize it's there. So what can we do? The first step is simple, but not easy. Admit we're all vulnerable. No one, no matter how smart or educated, is exempt from overestimating their abilities in areas where they lack true experience. As intellectual historian Robert Burton once said, the feeling of knowing is not a reliable guide to whether or not you actually know something. To counteract the effect, we need to start by inviting feedback from peers, from mentors, from actual experts. An external perspective can give us the objectivity our own mind often lacks, but this only works if we're truly open to it, willing to listen without defensiveness, and to accept that we might be wrong. Deliberate practice also plays a key role, but it's not just about repetition. It's about focusing on weaknesses and getting clear, immediate feedback to keep our self-assessment aligned with reality. Without that feedback loop, practice can actually make overconfidence worse, not better. Another powerful tool? Metacognition, thinking about our thinking. By reflecting regularly on the limits of our knowledge, by asking ourselves, what am I missing? Or, what might I not know yet? We start to loosen the grip of premature certainty. As Socrates put it, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. And maybe the hardest, but most important, habit we can build is learning to live with uncertainty. In a world that rewards quick takes and confident answers, pausing to say, I don't know, takes real courage. But it's exactly that kind of pause that leads to better thinking, to deeper learning, to real growth. As Aldous Huxley once said, that men do not learn very much from the lessons of history is the most important of all the lessons that history has to teach. And perhaps in our time, the most important lesson of the Dunning-Kruger Effect is learning to question our own certainty, especially when we feel most sure we're right. Today, the landscape of knowledge has changed dramatically. The internet gives us instant access to surface-level information on just about anything. A few searches, a couple of videos, and suddenly we feel like we understand a topic. But that feeling is deceptive, and it fuels a new form of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Social media makes it even worse. Platforms reward confidence, especially if it's loud and polarizing, not nuance, not thoughtfulness. The more boldly you speak, the more likely the algorithm is to amplify your voice, regardless of whether you're actually right. And then there are the echo chambers, online communities that surround us with like-minded people and shield us from contradictory perspectives. Over time, this creates the illusion that we're experts simply because everyone around us agrees. But agreement isn't knowledge, and certainty isn't wisdom. In the end, the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't just about other people. It's a mirror, inviting each of us to examine our own assumptions, to check our confidence, and to stay curious. Because the real danger isn't ignorance. It's thinking we already know everything when we barely scratch the surface. In today's world, it's becoming harder and harder to recognize the limits of what we truly know. Not because we lack access to information, but because we have too much of it. The internet has made knowledge more accessible than ever, but it's also created what researchers call knowledge fragmentation, the ability to collect bits and pieces of facts without the deeper frameworks that make those facts meaningful. This gives us the feeling of understanding, without the actual substance behind it. As author Tom Nichols puts it in The Death of Expertise, the internet lets us contact and interact with many more people than we would normally encounter in our daily lives. But it can also give us the false impression that our views are more widely shared and more correct than they actually are. The answer isn't to abandon digital sources of knowledge. It's to use them with more self-awareness. That means recognizing that reading a few articles doesn't make us experts. Having access to information is not the same as understanding complex systems. And most importantly, learning how to tell the difference between credible sources and questionable ones. Maria Popova once wrote, "Critical thinking without hope is cynicism, but hope without critical thinking is naive." That balance between curiosity and discernment is how we navigate the modern knowledge landscape. Now, while the Dunning-Kruger effect operates at the individual level, its consequences ripple far beyond. When multiplied across millions of people, it begins to shape our societies, our institutions, and even how public discourse unfolds. Take democracy, for example. Voters are often required to evaluate complex policy proposals. But when those with limited understanding approach these topics with high confidence, they may support simplistic solutions to deeply complicated problems. That's where populist rhetoric thrives, offering certainty in place of nuance. In organizations, the effect can skew. When everyone is treated as equally knowledgeable, we lose the ability to distinguish expertise from opinion. So what can be done? At the personal level, it starts with metacognition, awareness of how we think, how we learn, and how we evaluate what we believe. But institutions also need to evolve. We need systems that reward intellectual humility, not just loud confidence. That means better processes for identifying real competence and for communicating expert knowledge in ways that foster trust, not division. In the end, the Dunning-Kruger effect reveals a strange paradox. The more we learn, the more we become aware of how much we don't know. As our knowledge grows, so does our contact with the vast unknown that surrounds it. This explains why true experts are often the first to say, "I'm not sure." They're not being evasive. They're being honest about the complexity they see. Understanding the Dunning-Kruger effect gives us a powerful tool for personal growth. It reminds us that knowledge begins not with certainty, but with curiosity and humility. It teaches us to embrace the discomfort of uncertainty, not as a weakness, but as the very foundation of wisdom. And perhaps most importantly, it helps us see human error more compassionately. Overconfidence, after all, often comes not from arrogance, but from the structure of learning itself. We mistake familiarity for mastery, and we assume our confidence means we're right. As physicist Richard Feynman famously said, "I believe that a scientist looking at non-scientific problems is just as dumb as the next guy." That kind of humility from one of history's greatest minds captures the heart of this entire phenomenon. Wisdom doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from knowing that we never will, and staying curious anyway.